right, can you see the slides? All right, cool. Yeah, now let's get started. So today, instead of like a usual lecture, we're doing a front-end versus backend panel. And the reason for doing this panel is because you are going to make a choice very soon regarding which branch or like which track are you going into. So we figured this is prime time for us to kind of like talk about the differences between the two tracks and also what you will be learning throughout those two tracks. And before diving, there are some announcements. First of all, I've just created a Piazza today, and you all should be automatically added. And if you are not added, please let me know. And from now on, please direct all your questions to the proper thread. So essentially, I have in the future, for each homework and each new project, we'll open a new post. And so please post all your questions there instead of the Slack channel. This way, it will like help to organize all the questions a little bit better. So yeah. And secondly, this is now a panel, but it was meant to be a lecture. So there's something that you do need to watch. We have curated a playlist called Internet 101. It's also inside the Notion lesson plan. And so please go and watch the Internet 101 playlist on your own time. It will take you around 40 minutes to finish all the lecture. And thirdly, the JavaScript homework is released. It's based off CS61A's first homework. So CS61A's first homework is in Python, but we have converted into a JavaScript version. So you will be doing something pretty similar to the 61A's first homework, but in JavaScript essentially. And also project 1 is due tonight. Please remember to submit your project 1. If you don't think you can submit it on time, if you do need some extension, please fill out the extension form. For project 1, you can assume you can get like a 1-day extension like for free, but you do need to fill out the extension form. And so the track decision form will be released very soon. And sorry, the track decision form is essentially it's essentially a form that allows you to make a decision on like whether you want to be in a front track or backend track. And the form will be due on the night of this Sunday. And which means that you can switch, you can hop on to the front lecture or the backend lecture on Thursday. And we will not be taking attendance on Thursday, so you can feel free to hop on to either lecture if you want. So yeah. Any questions about the announcement so far? Cool. Okay, now let's move on and briefly recap. William Lin, you're not muted. Someone else, is the extension form the DSP one? Yes. We'll make a separate extension form in the future. Yeah.
Can we answer a question right now, or is that at the end?
Sorry, what'd you say?
Can I ask a question about front stack versus basic stack, or should I wait? Or a backend versus after, or should we just throw them out anytime?
Probably after I talk through it.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, there will be a QA time at the end. So yeah. Cool. All right, so now let's briefly recap what we have covered in basic stack. So in basic stack so far, you have learned about HTML, you have learned CSS, and you have learned JavaScript. With these three fundamental skills in web development, you should be able to build some very, very simple websites. And also, after watching the Internet 101 playlist, you'll also be learning about how the internet works fundamentally. You have also learned how to use GitHub as a software version control. So yeah, you have learned a lot, even in the basics there. And now you have the choice between front-end track and back-end track. So first of all, let's just quickly recap what front-end track does. So in the front-end track, we'll be teaching you how to do React development and also UI and UX. So in terms of React development, I'll be using four lessons to teach React. We'll also have 2 React labs, and this gives you some hands-on activities that you can follow along during a lab, and it's pretty cool. And we'll also be having 3 UI UX lessons. This is taught by our design team, and we will be covering the basic UI UX principles and also how to use Figma. And after the UI UX lessons, we'll also be having 3 backend primer. The 3 backend primer lessons are essentially just a way for you all to get more familiar with the backend track as well. It will be a pretty condensed version of the backend track. And throughout the front homework, there will be 4 homeworks and 2 projects. Now here's the backend track. In the backend track, you will be learning about how to create backend server and also databases. So in terms of the server, we'll be teaching 2 choices. The first is Node.js, the second is Django. We'll first be covering Node.js since it's a little bit simpler, and then we'll be moving on to Django. And in terms of database, we are going to teach Postgres and also MongoDB. And how we'll structure our teaching of database is that we're going to follow Node.js by MongoDB, essentially like connect Node.js to MongoDB. And after we taught Django, we'll be teaching how to connect Django to Postgres. And after we've taught backend databases, we'll also be teaching some cloud technologies, essentially how to use AWS. And also in the backend track, we will be having 3 front-end primers, which is very similar to the front-end track. And there will also be 4 homeworks and 2 projects. Cool. So this is all the things I want to have a quick recap about. And now I guess let's start the panel. And essentially how the panel works is if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself or just like write it in chat. And the core staff here, which is me and Kim, I believe, will try our best to answer your questions. So yeah.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm primarily interested in the front-end track, but if I wanted to create a website that would, it'd be like an informational site, it would need to, I think the word is scraping, where they get information from other sites, like their lists, their videos and such. Mm-hmm. Would that aspect, that functionality of scraping all this information from other sites and putting it onto our site be best for the backend, that backend function?
It depends on how heavy the scraping is. So if you're looking at like scraping videos and download them and store it somewhere in the database, it will probably be a backend's job. You'll probably need a backend. However, if you're just looking for something really simple, like just scraping the descriptions, scraping some title, you can probably do it only by using frontend. However, it will probably be the best if you can do some very, very simple backend APIs. I feel like the backend primer will definitely cover that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also want to mention, I want to add on to that really quick. A lot of like front end is also like using APIs. So usually the backend people create APIs, but a lot of like, for example, if you're taking from like Spotify or something, they already have an API kind of available for public. So what a front end person would do is use that API kind of given already. So by that, you can use data from other websites. Yeah.
To add an API to our, sorry, this is another question, but just what's on top of mine. If we wanted to add like a Spotify API to our website, would we just copy and paste like the Spotify's API code into like our index HTML file?
So usually most like companies like have a really good documentation on how to use their API link, but it's usually in the form of a URL, which will teach you like how to like fetch a certain URL. But all of that is like kind of taught in like the React lesson, which I guess a specific term you're looking for is like fetching it or using a specific kind of tool like Axios that helps you also use API links.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Rebecca, what's your question?
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, so I was just wondering, just like a clarifying question. So like the backend students, they are able to learn either on database or server. They have to choose between one of them, or like, are they like both required?
Yeah. So the answer is you'll be learning all of them. So essentially you'll be learning 2 backend frameworks and 2 databases. The reason behind doing this is because once you learn like one backend framework, it'll be very, very easy to learn another backend framework. So yeah.
Gotcha, thank you.
And Willem.
Hi, yeah, I saw that the front end track had a huge emphasis on React. And I was just curious if you could like talk a little bit more about like what React is and sort of like what you do with React, because I don't really know what it does.
Yeah, Kim, do you want to get this question?
Yeah, for sure. So React basically is like kind of a mix of JavaScript and HTML, and it focuses a lot on like rendering, which is something we'll talk about more later. But definitely it's a way that you can create like component separation. It also has a virtual DOM. So I remember if you like learned the DOM in JavaScript, instead of using those specific methods, there's like other ways to use it, and which we'll teach in like React basically. But yeah, just a general idea. It's basically for like front end in which you can basically render like components, but basically mix JavaScript and HTML into one file.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. No.
Cool. Douglas, what's your question?
All right, so if we were looking to start our own website, but we don't think we'd be capable of doing both front end and back end ourselves, or we need the extra help, do you think it'd be easier to outsource the back end side or the front end side?
It really depends on how complicated the website that you're trying to build. So say if you're just building like a personal website or some pretty simple app, you probably don't need to outsource it. Because like once you learn through either track, you will probably have enough knowledge to work on the other track as well. This is why we are called like introduction to full stack development. And unless you're building something like really comprehensive, like an e-commerce website with like tons of like security stuff and payment stuff, otherwise I don't see the need to outsource anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like just personally, I was thinking about it. I'm weighing more towards the front end side because unless, like you said, if it does get too complicated where I'm gonna need the outside help, but the front end side will allow me to personalize it more versus I feel like the back end is much more just foundational structure. So I think I'm weighing more towards front end for now.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, it could also like depend on like what kind of thing you want to do with your website. Like a lot of websites, if it's like personal or like a portfolio kind of website, it doesn't even need a backend at all because it's all like pretty much like static. But if it's like something that needs more of like a database, then definitely like consider like learning a bit of backend. And yeah.
I had a quick question. So in terms of like what you'd like more, how do you figure out like if you'd enjoy front end more versus back end more? Is back end like more like actual coding, like I don't know, like algorithms and like programming and stuff? And is front end more like HTML and CSS where you're just designing, or do they both kind of combine elements?
Personally, I would say both front and backend requires quite a lot of coding, and the backend it will kind of be more like you'll be pretty much like handling business logic, if that makes sense. So say you want to build a e-commerce website, then someone needs to like handle all their user authentication, handle like storing all their users' information. That will kind of like be the backend's job. And in terms of front end, yes. Besides coding, it also requires quite a lot of design skills. However, usually people think that front end doesn't really need like any coding skills. That's not true, because like React is a pretty complicated framework, and I'll argue that React might actually be a little bit like harder than some of the backend framework. I would say it's different though, but both tracks definitely require some coding, and front end does need some like extra design skills. So yeah.
So like based on like what we've done in this class, how should we know what we kind of enjoy more?
This is a pretty tough question.
Yeah, I don't really know how to make up my mind.
I would recommend you to hop onto both lectures on Thursday, and because like you don't need to make the decision until Sunday, and feel free to come to the office hour to chat about this more, and kind of like to get a feeling of what front end track and back end track is. And but yeah, I would say start with like just hopping onto both lecture. Also feel free to flipping through the lesson plans in the future to get kind of like a feel of what both tracks are.
Okay.
I feel like my like 2 cents on it is kind of though I'm definitely more like front end biased because I know a lot more front end than back end. I would say like a good way to like gauge is kind of like front end does a lot more visual aspects. So maybe if you really enjoy like user facing kind of things, like maybe if you click this button, something happens. If you fill out this form, something happens. And if you have a really good like idea of how to like separate components, for example, like a nav bar is a certain component, like how to like structure like the code, I would say front end is definitely where you want to look into. If you're like more into like thinking about kind of like Alex said, like the business logic, like kind of like how the database is organized. Sometimes I would say this is more of what you probably did in like, if you like ever taken like 61A or 61B, a lot of that is kind of used in backend too. Just kind of like the logic of how to distribute the database, and then you would look towards like backend.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I just released a form, but I think I had my settings wrong. Sorry, give me 1 sec. Okay, I think it should be accepting responses now. Let me know if that works now. And the magic word today is panel. Someone asked, can you hop off after filling in attendance form? Usually during a lecture, I would say no, but since this is a panel, yeah. Kelly, what's your question?
Yeah, if you're someone who's looking to maybe self-study the other track yourself later, which one would you say it's easier to self-study?
They're both. I would say it really depends on. Still, it kind of really depends on your interest, and I feel like the kind of like the easiness to study really depends on like how interested are you in those materials. And in terms of like how easy it is to, I would say both tracks do definitely require you to put in some efforts. They're about the same difficulty, I would argue. But the front track, it's like more varied because like it does have like design and coding, but you can argue that backend track does have like cloud and development. So it's a pretty hard decision.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, I would actually argue that like the backend track might be a little bit more hard to study on your own. Just because like front end is usually, though there's like a lot of frameworks, React is usually like the main one that a lot of companies use. And it's kind of just like that one language that you need to get really good at. And we'll teach you a lot of other things like UI, UX, as well as like Sass and styling tools. But I would say React is like the main thing, even though React is really complicated and it takes a while to get good at. But backend, there's like a ton of tools, and it's often like you have to know the difference between those tools and like which one's like better to use in certain projects. So I feel like backend might require a lot more like research as to just find out which like better tool is needed for a certain project.
Yep, I see, thank you.
Do we have any other questions, concerns?
I had a quick question. This was kind of related to my earlier question. But I really enjoy like the logical stuff of like coding, like like loops and like functions and stuff like that. So would that be more like back end or front end? Because I feel like I struggle with design a lot more, even though I'm interested in front end because I can see its like importance. But like would you do like that logical part more in front end or in back end?
Yeah, so usually I would say backend handle more of the logic. But right now it's kind of like the development of front frameworks.
Right.
Quite a lot of website also place a lot of emphasis like handling some business logic using front as well. I would say like if you feel yourself not comfortable doing design, and you really do enjoy kind of like the feeling of programming and writing algorithms, then I definitely recommend you to the backend track, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I know like these questions are a little bit hard to gauge because it's actually like you can actually like use like both. Like it's hard to explain, but like the logic is kind of used in like both, like writing for loops and stuff. Like you can see those in both the front end and back end. Like I remember a specific like question that I like was asked in like a internship interview before. They like asked specifically like why would you do this thing in a front end versus a back end? So it's like definitely like these are questions that a lot of like even like companies ask a lot of the times too, like, oh, should I put this in the front end or in the back end database? So definitely that's why it's a little hard to gauge, but definitely I would say like, yeah, there is like a misconception that there isn't like a lot of like writing like for loops, a lot of logic in front end. But I would say there is actually a lot of like writing logic in front end as well. Like every time you basically like want to click on a button, you want something to happen. That would be like a whole logic function in itself. Or like, for example, if you want to display a ton of posts and like, for example, Reddit or something, that would require another like for loop as well. So it's definitely, you will also be writing functions in both front end and back end.
Do we have any other questions, concerns?